Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am Alison Brower, the executive editor at The Ankler, which is a premier independent digital publication, podcast, newsletter, and live journalism like this here today company covering the business of Hollywood. And today we're just going to chop it up about some of the issues that are really challenging the industry and challenging us in covering it. We have our editor-in-chief and CEO, Janice Min, our friend of the Ankler, Breaker Media founder, Lachlan Cartwright, who's part of our programming on the stage this week, and Natalie Jarvie, who writes and edits our creator economy newsletter, Like and Subscribe, that is all about how the creator economy is encroaching on and aligning with Hollywood. So the first topic today is kind of the topic on the lips of every person in Hollywood, which is the Block the Merger campaign and the potential merger of Paramount and Warner Brothers. There was a lot of news about that here at CinemaCon last week. Janice, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think probably all of you here are aware of what's happening, or it's somehow maybe, floating in the back of your mind about how it impacts the business you work in. Paramount, as many of you know, has a $111 billion bid to acquire Warner Brothers that is going through regulatory approval right now. And for the people who work in entertainment, it's a really harrowing, scary, sometimes exciting moment. But ultimately it results in the closing or the folding of one of the most historic, legendary, greatest studios in the history of entertainment, which I think the big fear around consolidation is that this will result in thousands and thousands of job losses. It'll remove a buyer from the market. It'll result in less production. So there's a pretty active movement to block the merger. Democratic politicians and some Republicans are taking action. Some believe that state attorneys general, including Rob Bonta out of California, will file to try to block the merger. And it's kind of a drama that has people divided in Hollywood and waiting to see what happens.
And the merger also comes with like a $79 billion, I think, debt load. And
it's the most amount of debt any publicly held company will have ever held, which why people think when David Alison, the CEO, is saying they'll release 30 movies a year and they're going to spend, that it doesn't seem to quite jive with the amount of debt that's being carried. And if you look at the amount of debt that Warner Brothers carried alone, it was to the point where it basically has collapsed the company and they were forced in a position to sell.
Right. And we also know that even though there's cord cutting and the cable business is over, somehow something like, I'm not sure I have the statistic exactly, but like 80% of the current revenue from Warner Brothers Discovery still comes from these linear assets and the old business. So
yeah,
what happens to Warner Brothers Discovery if this merger doesn't go through is another question.
Well, I think that, sorry, and I'll just say one last thing on this, is that I think they're going to have 29 cable channels still, and they claim that they're not going to close a single one of them, which seems
hard to believe.
It's hard to
believe. They would keep them all, running. Some of these are so irrelevant that, you can't even find them when you're trying to look for them. I mean, how many times have people tuned into some of these?
Animal Planet.
Works? Yeah. I know you're a fan of that.
Huge. but it just doesn't, some of it's just not adding up in people's minds.
Right. And Lachlan, you cover the entertainment business, but also very close to the New York media business. And a big question here is that if this merger happens, CNN and CBS are going to be under the same roof. So
yeah, and that leads to a lot of fears within CNN. We've seen what has played out at CBS since Paramount took it over and Barry Weiss being parachuted in there. There's already been 2 rounds of layoffs. One round of layoffs was already in progress. That was happening under Tom Zabrowski. Then a second round of layoffs happened under Barry Weiss. But people I speak to at CNN, there's real concerns about them losing their jobs. And if they don't lose their jobs, there's concerns about will CNN be reorientated politically? because I think people think that CBS is in the progress of being reorientated. And I broke a story last week in Breaker. I got a hold of an invite that David Alison had sent out for White House Correspondents, which is this coming weekend, but he sent out an invite for an event on Thursday, ostensibly to honor the Trump White House, but also said he was honoring CBS White House correspondents. There was only one caveat, as I uncovered. He didn't invite any of the CBS White House correspondents. So this is a party to promote and celebrate Donald Trump. So I think that, the concern is come September, if this does, go through, what ends up happening with CNN. And there's a lot of bloat there. There's a lot of people there that are doing jobs that are outdated, that were really kind of, made for linear, and have made this big push to digital. But it's really, to be seen how much, impact that has had. CNN All Access, and their first big, entrepreneurial thing was meant to be their weather, element, which still hasn't launched.
Can I just add, I think one of the underreported parts of the deal is that, the FCC does not allow foreign ownership of broadcast, by over 25%. That's the maximum. And this deal is now getting backed by 3 Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. That
was going to be a Chinese at one point, yeah, right? With Kushner, right?
Yep. And it brings the total to 22%. So you're getting really close to foreign ownership, and it's hard, money is never free, right? And so these are governments that aren't necessarily always aligned with, the United States.
Or even journalism. You ask Khashoggi's family.
MBS, who was murdered, who has been widely believed to have been murdered at the order of Mohammed bin Salman who runs Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund is one of the largest investors.
Yeah, look, it has problematic issues on several fronts. And as you said, money isn't free. So what are the motives of some of these, states giving money when, we know that they have, in other elements tried to influence, media. And this is a pretty good way. This is a pretty good way of buying that.
So, go ahead, Natalie.
I was just going to say, it's important to take a step back and think about how long this deal has been going on, how long the Warner Brothers sale process has been underway. And there was a moment when we thought Netflix was going to acquire most of the entertainment assets. And that was a huge moment. I think that was a huge surprise to everyone in Hollywood when that news hit. And it kind of signaled this kind of major reorientation of all of Hollywood, that Netflix could suddenly be kind of the most dominant player in the space and owner of this legacy studio. And that freaked everyone out for a second. And then I think everyone kind of got okay with it. And when that deal fell apart and Paramount came in, that's when now I feel like we're seeing a lot of this anxiety and this stop the merger because of some of these things we've been talking about, some of these larger concerns that, weren't a factor with Netflix, even though, lots of people had questions about whether they would preserve the theatrical window and what it would mean to have a streaming service own this legacy studio. It didn't come with all the baggage.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Netflix gobbled it up, Janice, they wouldn't have had CNN, right? They were just after the studio.
Yeah, they were going to leave the cable assets and CNN alone. And that was already going to be spun off into a separate company by Warner Brothers. And
Animal Planet would have been saved, right?
Totally saved. Not non-endangered species, I guess you would say in Animal Planet language. But I think that it was a little bit like pick your poison as well. A lot of people will still bemoan what Netflix has done to the industry, driving down prices, changing a business model that had been very successful, pivoting every other studio to go all in on streaming. And so it was a little bit like pick your battle. And I think the political elements of the Alison ownership, he's made I think they've made their political allegiances very clear. And I think a lot of people, and whether or not those politics or your politics, I think there's always been this impression of impartiality. And
particularly with CNN.
Yeah. And CBS.
And CBS,
very
true.
much so CBS.
Yeah,
but and the night of the State of the Union, David Ellison, this really rankled people in the industry. He was, photographed. He took a selfie with Lindsey Graham, from the House floor. And it was right before, I think there were some decision getting made or something. I think Warner, it was some key moment.
Key pivotal
It was
moment.
a key, yeah. And so I think for, people think that instinct does not get turned off once the deal goes through. Even if he's working to the deal, that doesn't turn on and off with a switch.
Speaking of wealthy families with very clear political leanings with a lot of power in media, Lachlan, you've done a ton of reporting on the Murdochs. You crashed Rupert Murdoch's birthday party
I did. I was the only journalist outside the grill for 9 hours, staking it out, getting photos of everyone from Wendy Deng, Tony Blair, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Lachlan Murdoch embracing me. I don't think it was lovingly.
Just remind people how old he was turning, because
95. Can you believe that? 95. So we went up, Breaker Media went up to the grill and staked it out, and we got a bunch of world exclusive photos. But that could potentially be one of the last times all of those people are in the same room, all the Murdoch execs and all of these people connected to Rupert Murdoch, including Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft and Roger Goodell. It was quite the procession of people that were there.
Lachlan, I'm curious, how did he appear?
Do you know what? I have to say, look, he got out of the car. He had a walking stick. He is 95. And he was, helped, but then he was able to walk in, unaided. And what was, really revealing to me as he walked out, I said to him, Rupert, how was tonight? And Hugh Jackman had just serenaded him. He was the main entertainment, and he'd sung New York, New York. He'd sung all the hits from The Greatest Showman. And he'd also sung a song called Still Call Australia Home, which is a huge anthem for Aussies. It's a Qantas theme song. And he just looked at me, Janice, in the eyes, and he said, "Splendid." And then I did say, Rupert, congratulations, we brought you a lifetime subscription to Breaker, at which case Lachlan Murdoch just started cracking up laughing. He still hasn't reclaimed the lifetime subscription, so I'm kind of worried that maybe he's losing a little bit if he hasn't taken me up on that,
he loves
that offer. Yeah, I mean, look, it's lifetime value, even at 95.
And this all comes after years of drama over success.
Correct. I mean, that family was the inspiration for the TV show, even though the showrunners for some time tried to say it was a amalgamation of the Redstones and this other one. It really was, the Murdochs. And, the question is, now this is kind of settled that Project Harmony, which was this Nevada lawsuit that they went on to sort of roll the other kids, James and Elizabeth and Prudence. As a result of that, they settled and were paid out $1 billion each. So it's really Lachlan's company now. And when Rupert does go to the big newsroom in the sky, he tells people he's going to live forever, by the way. But, he is 95. When he does go to the big newsroom in the sky, the question then becomes, what moves will Lachlan make? And what happens to a number of assets. So there's a lot of loss leading newspapers, out of the UK. The Sun in London is a great example. There's Aussie newspapers that don't make any money that have been kept around because Rupert's a newspaper bloke. Lachlan isn't. Lachlan is a broadcast, a sports person, and he has invested heavily on things like Tubi. Whereas, his father is really behind the California Post, which just launched.
Right.
Natalie, I would love to hear you talk about the Fox's moves into the digital world, but also creators.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. It does seem to really stem from Lachlan and his leadership of the company. Fox, after selling many of their assets to Disney, got a lot smaller and hasn't been like a real serious player in Hollywood in that way in a while. Kind of the last company I would have expected to go all full-throated into the creator economy, but they've made a number of really interesting moves, all stemming from their acquisition of Tubi, which is a free ad-supported streaming platform. They have leaned really heavily on creator content. They had a movie called Sidelined that performed incredibly well for them. And that kind of has set the tone for more investment into projects that star creators. They've also, brought a lot of, YouTube content onto their platform in kind of like a second run licensing window. And now they've started to make a bunch of other moves. They acquired a company called Red Seat Ventures, which is a podcast advertising and distribution network that works with a number of largely conservative media figures.
Tucker, Megan.
Exactly. Yes. But they also are now trying to expand outside of that world. They signed a big deal with AudioChuck, which is behind Crime Junkies, one of the most popular podcasts around. They're now working with Ashley Flowers, the creator of that podcast. They've brought her show to Tubi and are leaning into more of those kinds of projects. Fox Entertainment just hired a head of creators who's signing deals. They did a deal with a food creator recently, and they're going to be doing more to try to develop digital first projects, but projects that could eventually wind up on, Fox Broadcast Network. So it's really interesting how they are starting to reorient themselves around the creator economy. And I started to add all these things up recently and realize that they're doing more than anyone else. They're doing more than Disney, more than Warner Brothers, more than Paramount. And it is what I write about all the time, but does feel like it's the way of the future. It is where a lot of eyeballs are turning and where a lot of people are spending the time. And it could put Fox in a really strong position going forward.
Which is crazy to think about, actually, that this, because Fox News, the average viewer, I think, is 71 at this point, and that company is the one that could potentially own creators. I also just want to raise that Natalie has covered a lot now. This move to get, as podcasting has pivoted to video, that it's become this source of cheap programming for legacy brands, and that there is a gold rush to buy these podcasting companies or buy podcasts so you can put those shows on your streaming service. And I think, has it confirmed? Is Versant buying Fox Media's podcast?
So that is something that is in discussions right now. That Vox Media, who have a great pod network, including Pivot, which is Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, they're looking to sell off that asset, which is the most profitable in the Vox empire. And Versant, thank you, is the, I got in trouble for saying.
No one knows how to say
Versant, is someone that is in negotiations to buy that.
And also, did Versant, they struck a deal with Crooked Media? Is that right?
So MS now have Crooked Media. They have a Sunday night show, which is kind of a highlights, a 9 p.m. on Saturdays with Crooked.
Yeah. And I think, Natalie's written about the cost of this versus regular TV, which is, again, another threat to traditional production, if you want to.
Yeah, well, I think about it, go back a little bit. When I first started writing about podcasts, they were largely seen as the new radio, right? And something shifted in the last couple of years. And really where it started from was the dominance of YouTube in our living rooms. Suddenly people started watching YouTube on the biggest screen in their house, which is often their television in their living room. And all of a sudden, that meant that YouTube started to prioritize longer content, as opposed to 10-minute videos, 15-minute videos, which was kind of the bread and butter of YouTube for a long time. Suddenly, hour and a half long, 2-hour long videos were performing really well. And a number of podcasts started to introduce video and started to have video components to their podcasts. And now you can watch video on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. So suddenly when podcasts are video shows, are they podcasts? Are they talk shows? Suddenly it's all television at the end of the day. And Hollywood is just kind of starting to wake up to that. And it is a much cheaper way to produce a lot of content that you can pretty easily flip onto any TV network or streamer that you want. Netflix is doing a lot of deals with podcasts that already exist and also for some original podcasts. We mentioned MS Now. Hulu has some video podcasts now on their platform. Everyone's kind of starting to experiment with this. And I do think it is going to largely replace your kind of daytime TV, syndicated TV, because it's just so much more cost effective. And you can move it through the ecosystem so it can live on your broadcast network, but then also on streaming, and then you can chop it up into a bunch of little clips and
non-union
everywhere.
Not
it's largely non-union, which, might start to change, as more Hollywood players come into the mix. But, certainly, it's kind of a down and dirty production. Usually there's one or two static cameras and, it all happens pretty quickly. I mean, you can I wrote about TBPN recently, which everyone's been talking about because of the sale to OpenAI. What I found so fascinating about that is that they use their 3-hour live show as essentially the top of the funnel, because once they have that live show, they can
tell people what TBPN is,
it's a 3-hour live technology broadcast that streams on X or on YouTube. It's a couple of guys who've worked in the tech industry for a long time, and they talk, they bring on guests, they bring on CEOs, they have advertisers. And, so they record this 3-hour live show every day during the week. And then they put it out on their podcast RSS feed. Then they do a cut down version of it, Diet TBPN, that they put out on their podcast feeds and on YouTube. And then they chop it up into a bunch of clips and they distribute those on YouTube and X and TikTok and other places. And, it's an incredibly cost effective way to get a lot of content that then you can move through your ecosystem.
And there are a lot of other news providers in the podcasting world that are kind of taking over the conversation, not just of daytime, but of kind of the late night conversation, which now has no time of day, but tons of these people are sort of taking over that space as well.
Adam Freeland is a good example of that. Adam now does these long form interviews and he's booking people like Gavin Newsom and Mamdani and, is becoming like the go-to, bloke if you're promoting a film or whatever. He's now front and center to get on because he's got this huge audience and he's doing these really long interviews that, like the Dick Cavett, type, interview.
When he modeled his set after Dick Cavett.
Correct.
And so he really is trying to lean into that late night format. Of course, you don't have to actually watch it at night. And that's, the whole point of it is that it's, much easier to find and consume. But absolutely, I mean, as we see Stephen Colbert go off the air, I largely expect that there will be a new crop of YouTube talent who will kind of take the mantle. And it will be interesting to see if one of these kind of traditional late night host guys decides to go all in on YouTube in their kind of post late night career. And
maybe Colbert. I mean, that's kind of been the talk, right? That he could go off and strike a YouTube deal.
He absolutely could. Conan has done this really well with what he's built with his podcast. And, you could definitely imagine that with the right team, someone like Colbert could go and start a show on YouTube.
For a fraction of the cost, right?
Fraction of the cost, fraction of the staff. It might take a little while to build up the audience. It's not easy to build a new audience on YouTube these days, but when you've got a brand name like Stephen Colbert, you've got a head start and there's a really compelling business proposition there.
And young people in particular, want to do something independent and that's on their own, especially now that all the pathways into Hollywood are kind of falling apart. I mean, Rupert Murdoch is an extreme example at age 95.
And if he's a young person, but
No, what I'm saying, all across Hollywood, boomers and older Gen Xers are holding onto their jobs. There's not as much of a pathway up. The industry is shrinking, and this sort of independent path into creating your own thing and then building a business out of that is much more attractive to people that want to enter the industry now.
I mean, it was for Breaker. I mean, I created this after 2 decades working in legacy media and, I thought I'd give it a crack. And, a year in, we're profitable. I'm on Beehive and, part of the Beehive Media Collective, but it was a huge leap of faith for me to go independent after having the infrastructure that I was so used to in a legacy newsroom, the lawyers, the designers, the photographers, the bench of editors that you had, colleagues to help you stand a story up. But, fortune favors the brave.
Natalie, it would be helpful to hear you explain the economics of the TBPN deal because it doesn't have that many viewers and they were able to sell it for an extraordinary sum.
Yeah, I think they have something like 50,000 live unique visitors on a given broadcast across all platforms. X is actually their most successful platform, which is pretty interesting because that's really where their audience is. So I wrote about them a month or so ago, and I was watching a lot of TBPN and kind of comparing how many views they would get on YouTube versus X, and the views on X were significantly higher, which is interesting because YouTube is really where the best monetization tools are built in. But they primarily make money from advertising. If you've ever watched their show, their advertising is front and center. Sometimes the hosts wear sweatshirts or hats.
The Ramp is one of their big.
I don't even know what Ramp does, but I know Ramp by name because of TBPN. I think they were on track for something like 15 million in advertising revenue this year, which would have been triple what they made last year. They're only like a 2-year-old show, so they're very young. But OpenAI bought them for somewhere in the low hundred millions of dollars, which is remarkable. It's a huge multiple. I think, there are a few things going on there. One, OpenAI decided that this was the direction they wanted to take and was willing to spend perhaps a little bit more than the actual market value of this company. These founders also have relationships and have known each other for a long time. So I think there was some built-in trust. And my understanding is that these conversations had been going on for quite a while. But it is really impressive to see how you can take a pretty small audience. I don't even think they have 1 million subscribers on YouTube and turn it into something that's worth low hundreds of millions.
Isn't a factor also there that Sam Altman is a dire need of good press? That this narrative around AI seems to be changing, much like the tech, narrative of years ago of do no evil and Zuckerberg and these blokes are cool. And now that narrative is turning around on the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic.
But let's also remember, like, a lot of these news people, so-called news people, are not journalists, right?
Correct. That's very important to note that when you watch TBPN, those interviews are very soft.
Yeah.
And that's why they get the people that they get. They will come on. VCs will come on because that is a safe environment. And their flacks will say, if you go on TBPN, you can announce something and you're not going to get the heavy questions that you would get if you're interviewed by the Ankler or Breaker Media.
It's true. One of the co-founders of TBPN was a co-founder of Soylent. Another was a longtime investor in the tech industry. So yes, these are people with, relationships with a lot of folks in Silicon Valley. But to your point, Lachlan, like, people are going on there and breaking news. So yes, they're not traditional journalists, but they are able to break news. Travis Kalanick went on recently and broke news around his cloud kitchen startup.
Former Uber executive that got himself in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah, and he said on the show that that he didn't like all the press he got from places like the New York Times.
I bet.
But he said it out loud. He said the thing out loud. It was clear why he was there on that show breaking that news. But when people have that outlet, they're going to go to those places as opposed to the journalists. So you have to take them seriously in that way, even if you know that, yes, the questions are a little bit different. They're going to be softer. They're not going to get the same scrutiny. I did want to say, as we were talking about the kind of TBPN audience, really this all comes back to like how important the niche content is right now. We had a moment in the creator space where you had big, broad creators like a Mr. Beast who were trying to get as many people as possible to watch their channel. That has largely become really hard to do for a number of complicated reasons, including like how the YouTube algorithm prioritizes content. And we're in an age of the niche now where you don't have to have a huge audience to make a good amount of money and maybe be able to sell your company for a pretty good multiple. If you have an engaged audience, a loyal audience, and you're reaching the right people, like TBPN reaches a really affluent community and they reach CEOs, so they're able to charge a lot for their advertising, then you can build a really good business. And a lot of the creators that I write about these days are people who are using the smaller audience that they have to sell a membership to a course or merch, some sort of a makeup line or another product or maybe a live tour or tickets to a movie that they've put in a movie theater. There are a lot of ways to extract value out of a smaller audience.
I want to just touch back quickly on what Lachlan was saying of OpenAI really also looking for a way to sort of at least have some place in the narrative about itself and about the, how AI is changing tech and entertainment. And the relationship between AI and Hollywood has like gone haywire in the last year. between all the, the large language models, the video models. And now we're at a moment where Disney just ended its deal with Sora. OpenAI just shut down Sora. Like several months ago, they were announcing that they were going to make a $30 million animated film with Sora that would be ready in time for Cannes. I'm actually been lately trying to figure out what's even going on with that narrative, and like what do we think is going to happen with AI video and Hollywood and AI tools in Hollywood? We had a great panel about it here yesterday, but from within the industry, what are people feeling about that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of apprehension. I do think that there is a tendency to clump all technology that seems a little scary into the AI bucket, and it's not all the same. And one of the things that we have covered this year was just how much the conversation has shifted that to the point where at the Oscars, every single one of those Best Picture films certainly used AI, like every single one of them. But it wasn't spoken about. It didn't become a controversy. I feel like in the year since The Brutalist and some other Academy nominated movies had controversy, in The Brutalist, it was Adrian Brody's voice was made more Hungarian accented through AI. And that became a big thing that made people nuts. To this year where no one said a peep, I think that revealed the level of adaptation and production using AI tools. And so I think people see opportunity with AI in production in that you can make, it makes an easier point of entry for independent filmmakers. You'll be able to make things that look like they cost more. Maybe that means more work. And then, on the flip side of that, I think the things that really freak people out are things like Tilly Norwood,
So you interviewed, right?
I interviewed the creator.
The creator,
Yes.
Tilly Norwood, sorry.
And then, these synthetic performances, writing, people want to know their stories are still coming from humans. And I think that this is going to be, I think probably the next year we'll see a real test of like how much the public accepts this kind of uncanny valley, look and feel of AI generated, material. And I mean, the death of Sora 2, which I'm sure a lot of you were following, it came out, was like terrifying to Hollywood, single prompt turn, make amazing videos. And then it was like I think this is the risk with some of these AI products is they just become a novelty, and like the novelty faded. People stopped downloading the app.
A lot of hype, right? There was a lot of hype.
And then there was no engagement. And I mean, to the point where like OpenAI had to kill it. And so I think these kind of so I think these novelties of AI are going to have a harder time than sort of the practical uses in production.
It's an interesting benchmark. The guild contract negotiations in Hollywood that happened 3 years ago that led to the writers and actors strikes. AI was front and center in those conversations. It felt like this existential threat, but it was also really amorphous. No one really knew what AI was going to do to Hollywood. Flash forward 3 years and it was barely a blip in the negotiations. The Writers Guild has already struck a deal with the coalition of studios known as the AMPTP. And their focus was on getting a cash infusion to their healthcare pension plan because that was so depleted that they just need to be able to help their members pay for healthcare. That's where we're at right now in this industry, where there are these huge, big questions just about the future of even having jobs and how you're going to pay for yourself and your family. And that was more important than kind of the question of AI. And essentially what they put into their contract this time around was like that they could have a conversation with the studios when new technology comes around and kind of figure out the best plan. That's not like an incredible protection. I mean, I guess it's good to like be able to have a conversation about it, but it just shows how much people's thinking has shifted around.
Yeah. And I think also, when in that WGA agreement, one of the things that, wasn't said, but was sort of very clear to me was that weirdly in this age of AI panic, top writers they've never had more power, right? Top showrunners, top writers, and people still want creative talent, like no AI is replacing that yet. And, so those people still command, you know, not, I think that there's also something happening in the industry where if you are at the top, you are extremely in demand. Everybody wants to work with you. And it's the middle class and below, creators who are really struggling. But because everyone in the industry wants this feeling of like a sure thing and security, you know, they've really been leaning on top names to just produce more and more and more and more.
Like David E. Kelly's got 3 shows on the air and 10 on deck.
And he just turned 70.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
We're going to take some questions from you all if you've got them. But before we finish up here, I'm looking at the title of our panel. Maybe each of you can comment on, for Hollywood and for us in what we do, Janice, what is the opportunity in chaos?
Yeah, I think that we have seen periods in the industry before that have been really down in the dumps and felt like it was all over. And those eras give rise to incredible independent studios, films, television. And, you know, you can look at what happened like in the 1960s there, you know, it was all like terrible shows that were derivative of other shows that were derivative of Green Acres. And I mean, it was like everything was sort of ridiculous. And then that gave birth to the 1970s, which is considered one of the greatest creative eras in Hollywood history. Where, you know, you had obviously The Godfather, Jaws, all these new directors came up. And so that was probably considered the finest decade in film history. And maybe with second place being the 90s, which was also the rise of Sundance independent films, you know, for better or worse, Harvey Weinstein, Scott Rudin, people who were beginning to make very different, distinctive kinds of original ideas in the market. And that grew again out of frustration with these sort of sclerotic studios and an era of like unchecked M&A.
I was always taught to never let a crisis go to waste. So in this level of disruption, where you've got a lot of journos losing their jobs, you've got a lot of legacy media making cuts, the bar to entry to starting your own thing has never been lower with Substack, which the anchor is on, with Breaker, which Beehive is on. And if you have that niche, to Natalie's point, whether it's media, whether it's Hollywood, and you own that niche. You know, I look at the media now as a mirror that is just being thrown to the ground. And those little shards, I've picked up one of those shards and created something different and new. And like I said, a year in, we're profitable. So there is opportunity there if you're entrepreneurial, but you need that niche. You cannot have some broad remit. You need to have that niche. And then, you know, you can create something that means you're not reliant on the overlords, forever and ever.
And I've been writing a lot about Hollywood's increased interest in creators and working with creators, signing them to deals at Netflix and Amazon and other places. And that's all really exciting. But I think where the biggest opportunity will actually come from the creator economy is the ways in which people who work in other industries can start to leverage the tools and the playbook of the creator economy for what they do. I just wrote a story about kind of the rise of the middle class creator and how many of them have jobs in other fields. They're real estate agents or small business owners who are, using social media to market the product that they're selling and find an audience and find a customer base. And I think a lot of people in media and Hollywood could be doing more of that too. And I do think we will start to see more traditional entertainment companies and media companies not just sign deals with existing creators, but figure out how to really make social media work for them, how to incubate IP on YouTube and then run it through their funnel and eventually get a hit movie or, that type of thing. I think we're just on the cusp of that.
I think the risk of that though, and also in independent news is like, when independent people have success, like the gatekeepers come in and gatekeepers, I think
you better come in with a checkbook, Janice.
Huge checkbook, right? But, part of what's happening now is people are angry at the gatekeepers, right? They lost trust in the gatekeepers, whether they are the legacy news outlets or whether, it's, people who can't who had a great idea but can't sell their show because there's like this layer of executive who can tell them no. And that's all been erased now. And I think, Natalie had interviewed Markiplier, the YouTuber with 17 million. How many YouTube? 38, sorry, Markiplier. And he bypassed the gatekeepers. He bypassed distribution through a studio and released a horror movie on his own that opened at #1.
Yeah, but in our conversation yesterday, in front of a packed house here, he did tell us that he did try to go to the gatekeepers and they turned him down and he did it himself. So especially for people who are building something outside of the traditional ecosystem, there's still a value in the gatekeepers sometimes and getting that stamp of
and that's true in media as well, because we've seen a lot of these people who have gone off to independent. Joanna Stern, the tech columnist of the Journal, is a great example. She left, she's starting her own thing on Beehive, but then NBC swooped in and she's now going to be, a contributor at NBC. I'm on the Master of Vanity Fair. I'm a contributing editor there. I still want the attachment to legacy media, but at the same time, I'm building my own thing.
Why? Out of nostalgia?
Yeah, no, I think I want to do those bigger pieces with the rigor of the checkers and the editors and the lawyers and the designers. And for me, I'm an instinct wrenched, and you've known me for many years. So I do still get a kick out of seeing, my stuff in print.
Yeah.
Call me old fashioned.
Oh, I will.
I'm wearing this hat. Also, shout out to the people with the hats in the audience. You guys are giving me a run for my money. So,
any questions out there for our esteemed panel? There we go. Something. While we walk over with the microphone. Thank you.
So to follow up on what you just said, quick question before my question. Who was that filmmaker that released the horror film again?
Oh, his name is Mark Fishbach, or Markiplier. He's a YouTube creator who over about 3 years made an independently financed horror film and released it independently in theaters with the help of a kind of unconventional distributor who could help him just kind of like connect with theater owners. Made $50 million worldwide.
Wow. Okay. So my real question was, have you heard the status of where YouTube is at with the insertion ads that would be swappable like traditional TV commercials on your programming?
I don't know the latest on that, though. It's something I've been following. I mean, that will change the game for creators.
At last year's upfronts, which is the ad market where all the TV networks go and tell people about all the great shows they're making, and bring out talent. Last year was a real change in that it all became about ad tech. And you realize like that, the shows are just the product now. And like it's really advertising businesses. I mean, it's always been that, but now they were leading with that. But it was all about, AI enabled ad placement here, this, that, and to me, that is going to, that's the next war that's going to get fought. It's not necessarily for showrunners, but it's going to be about ad tech. And I would be very shocked if YouTube doesn't have big announcements around that. Because one of the things YouTube is also trying to do is they're trying to get an ad premium equivalent to what television gets. Because they still feel like they're getting dinged for being like, cat videos or whatever the sort of, Madison Avenue perceptions of YouTube are still. And that's why they run Emmy campaigns for some of their.
That's why they bought the Oscars. That's why they'll probably take a run at the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, great question.
Anybody else? We've got one here in the middle. Dueling mics.
I guess my question is for Natalie. It's about the theatrical model, the shrinking of the release of a film to when you see it on other platforms. You think the theatrical model is going to survive in the next 10 years because of its changing cultural significance?
I want Janice to answer this too, because I primarily read about YouTube these days. I feel like we've settled in on the 45-day window. That feels like where things are at, and people will experiment with it. Certainly, Netflix doesn't always do that. But I don't know. That just feels like it's kind of settled there.
So it's an interesting thing is happening where, theatrical's dead. No one goes to the movies, but then Gen Z loves in real life experiences. And so, there are certain directors that have become total darlings of Gen Z. Like they'll go see a Ryan Coogler film or a Christopher Nolan film. And like those directors are bigger than any talent they could put in a film. And so you're seeing that level of fandom. And whether it's around a person or, a show or a film, that level of fandom is what's really driving audience places. And so that's why these studios like Netflix, they're creating Stranger Things house. I'm sure Netflix has a gazillion live activations of what they do here in Vegas going on right now. And so, Gen Z actually loves to go to the movies. And
that's why we've also seen the success of K-Bot Demon Hunters, which wasn't supposed to be in theaters, but then they put in
the reverse window or what, where then they're putting even like the series finale of The Pit was put in Alamo Drafthouse theaters 2 days before. And so I think studios are going to find more inventive ways to use theaters. And I also think Gen Z will guide them in that. The whole, obviously from last year, the Minecraft experience of being able to go throw popcorn, bring your rubber chicken or whatever was happening, right? And so we're so far past that point of no phones in theaters, right? I think they now want you to bring your phone into a theater and engage and create social media content. And the marketing of a film, once it's made, is basically out of the studio's hands. So I feel like these marketing teams are now have to sit back and hope that someone some rabid group of fans takes on the cause for them. So I think you'll start to see decisions more fan driven than the one-way relationship we've had right now, where studios will tell you what you'll watch when you want to see it, and when they want you to see it, rather.
And Ted Sarandos came to CinemaCon last week. I don't know if it was his only time, but he hadn't been in a couple of years. And so he's looking, who knows what, but he's definitely looking at something more and different with Netflix in the theatrical experience.
Remember, even Netflix bought all these theaters, right? They own movie theaters because they know nothing is more important than having a theatrical experience for certain fans. And their filmmakers demand it, right? They demand a theatrical run of their films before they can stream exclusively on Netflix.
Yeah. If there's one more, I think we could take one more, but otherwise. All right. Otherwise, thank you so much, Janice, Lachlan, and Natalie. And thanks
for
hanging out today.